If death wants me, it will have to take me away from you first. The words barely escaped Adrian Ashford's lips as he tightened his trembling fingers around Claire Bennett's hand, refusing to let go even while the ancient silver symbols beneath the moon's sanctuary pulsed with fading light. His breathing had grown slow and uneven, yet his gray eyes never left hers. There was no fear in them anymore. Only fierce determination. Claire knelt beside him, her blue eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. She had entered his life believing she was saying goodbye to a dying king, but somewhere between quiet mornings and forgotten smiles, she had discovered a man worth fighting every destiny for. She reached up and gently brushed a loose strand of dark hair away from his forehead. "You promised we would face tomorrow together," she whispered. Adrian managed the faintest smile. "Then tomorrow will have to wait for us." The chamber around them seemed suspended between silence and eternity as moonlight poured through the ancient opening high above, painting silver across the white stone floor. Every heartbeat echoed louder than the last. Then everything faded into darkness. 3 months earlier. Claire Bennett had never imagined that a single royal letter could erase the future she had spent 22 years believing would be hers. The envelope arrived just after sunrise while she was helping her father repair the weathered fence surrounding their small farmhouse on the edge of the northern forest. Snow still clung to the distant mountains, but spring had already begun softening the fields stretching beyond their home. Life had always been simple. Honest work. Quiet evenings. Small hopes. That morning changed all of them forever. Her father stared silently at the royal seal before slowly breaking the crimson wax with shaking hands. As he read the letter, every trace of color disappeared from his face. Claire watched him lower the page without speaking for several long seconds. "What happened?" she asked gently. He looked at her with eyes filled with both love and heartbreak. "The crown has chosen you." Claire frowned in confusion. "Chosen me for what?" He struggled to answer. "Marriage." The word lingered between them like winter refusing to leave. Claire forced herself to smile, believing there had to be some mistake. "Someone else must share my name." Her father slowly shook his head. "No mistake." His voice broke almost into a whisper. "You are to become the wife of Alpha King Adrian Ashford." The world seemed strangely quiet. Even the birds resting in the nearby trees had fallen silent. Everyone across the kingdom knew the stories. Adrian Ashford had once been the strongest alpha anyone could remember. Wise. Honorable. Unmatched in battle. Then an unexplained illness had slowly stolen his strength year after year until whispers of his approaching death spread farther than royal proclamations. Many believed he would not survive another winter. Others claimed the kingdom was already preparing for the next ruler. Claire had never expected those rumors to become part of her own life. "Why me?" she finally asked. Her father looked away toward the distant mountains. "The letter says our family's debts will be forgiven. Our land will remain ours. Your younger brothers will never know hunger again." Claire understood immediately. This was never a proposal. It was a bargain wrapped inside royal parchment. She glanced back toward the little farmhouse where every memory of her childhood still lived inside its worn wooden walls. She loved her family more than she feared the unknown. If marrying a dying king would protect them, then she already knew her answer. Before the sun disappeared beyond the western hills, a black royal carriage waited outside her home, its silver crest gleaming beneath the fading afternoon light. As Claire climbed the steps without looking back, she did not notice a lone rider watching quietly from the distant tree line. Hidden beneath a dark traveling cloak, the stranger smiled faintly before turning his horse toward the capital, carrying news that the future queen had finally begun the journey someone had been waiting years to set into motion. The royal carriage traveled for nearly 2 days before the towering walls of Ashford Palace finally appeared beyond the snow-covered hills. Claire Bennett had imagined a place filled with music, celebration, and the excitement of a royal wedding. Instead, silence greeted her long before the palace gates opened. The enormous fortress stood proudly against the grey winter sky, but there was an unmistakable heaviness surrounding it, as though every stone had learned to expect sorrow instead of joy. Servants bowed respectfully as the carriage rolled across the grand courtyard, yet few smiled. Their eyes lingered on Claire with quiet sympathy before quickly looking away. She understood what they were thinking. They were welcoming a bride who would soon become a widow. The thought settled inside her heart like cold snow, but she refused to let it control her. A middle-aged woman wearing the formal robes of the royal household stepped forward and introduced herself as Lady Eleanor, the palace steward. Her voice was gentle, though exhaustion lingered beneath every carefully chosen word. "Welcome to Ashford Palace, Lady Claire. His Majesty has requested that you be treated with every respect." Claire nodded politely. "May I meet him before the ceremony?" Lady Eleanor hesitated only briefly. "His Majesty insists the wedding proceed first." Claire followed quietly through magnificent marble hallways lined with towering windows and silver banners displaying the royal wolf crest. Everything was beautiful, yet strangely empty. Portraits of generations of Alpha rulers watched silently from polished walls while elegant chandeliers reflected warm light across polished stone floors. Despite the luxury surrounding her, the palace felt less like a home and more like a place where everyone held their breath, waiting for something inevitable to happen. By late afternoon, the ceremony began inside the ancient royal chapel. Only a small gathering attended. There was no orchestra, no joyful celebration, and no crowded audience eager to witness history. Snow drifted softly beyond the stained glass windows while candles illuminated the quiet sanctuary. Claire stood alone before the altar until the great wooden doors slowly opened once more. Adrian Ashford entered without royal fanfare. He wore a perfectly tailored black ceremonial coat embroidered with silver, and although his posture remained dignified, Claire immediately noticed the fatigue hidden behind every measured step. His dark hair was neatly arranged, his grey eyes calm and intelligent, and his face carried the quiet strength of a man who had accepted burdens long before his time. He was undeniably handsome, yet there was a loneliness surrounding him that no royal title could conceal. Their eyes met for the first time. Neither spoke. Claire had expected bitterness or resignation, but instead she found kindness resting behind his tired expression. Adrian offered a respectful bow before standing beside her. The vows were spoken simply and without unnecessary ceremony. When the royal officiant declared them husband and wife, Adrian gently placed the wedding ring upon Claire's finger with steady hands. His voice was soft enough that only she could hear. "I am sorry your future brought you here." Claire looked at him for a long moment before quietly answering, "Neither of us chose today." Something almost resembling a smile appeared briefly across Adrian's face before disappearing again. After the ceremony ended, Claire expected to be escorted to the royal chambers they would now share. Instead, Lady Eleanor guided her toward a beautifully prepared suite in another wing of the palace. Confused, Claire turned back as Adrian approached. "Your Majesty." Adrian stopped a respectful distance away. "You have already sacrificed enough by coming here. I will never ask more from you than duty requires." Claire searched his face, uncertain how to respond. Adrian continued quietly. "Your rooms are your own. Your freedom remains your own. You will always be treated with respect inside these walls." With that, he offered another small bow before walking away through the candlelit corridor alone. Claire watched him disappear beyond the towering arches, realizing that the man everyone believed was waiting for death had spent his first moments as her husband protecting the one thing he believed she still deserved. Far above the palace, hidden within the highest tower overlooking the courtyard, a solitary figure lowered a brass spyglass and quietly folded a sealed letter. The wedding had happened exactly as expected. What came next, however, would determine whether the king's final chapter ended as planned or whether someone had begun changing a destiny that others had worked far too long to control. The first week inside Ashford Palace passed with surprising quiet. Claire Bennet quickly realized that although she now carried the title of queen, very little was expected of her beyond attending meals and learning the customs of the royal household. Adrian Ashford remained courteous whenever their paths crossed, yet he never imposed upon her time or invaded the peaceful routine she had begun creating for herself. Every morning she explored another part of the enormous palace, discovering elegant gardens waiting for spring, long marble corridors lined with portraits of former rulers, and libraries so vast they seemed capable of holding the entire history of the kingdom. The servants treated her with growing warmth, though many still watched Adrian with silent concern whenever he appeared. Claire noticed something else as the days passed. No matter how carefully the royal physicians adjusted his meals or medicines, Adrian always seemed strongest shortly after sunrise and noticeably weaker by evening. It was not the gradual exhaustion of ordinary illness. His strength faded with unsettling consistency, as though something invisible patiently drained it away each passing day. The pattern lingered in Claire's thoughts until curiosity finally led her toward the oldest library hidden beneath the western tower. Unlike the grand royal collection open to guests, this forgotten archive held weathered volumes few people seemed to visit anymore. Dust floated gently through narrow beams of afternoon light while shelves carved from ancient oak stretched nearly to the vaulted ceiling. Claire wandered quietly between them until an unusually worn journal caught her attention. The faded leather cover bore the royal crest of Ashford, and inside, neat handwriting belonging to a physician from generations earlier filled every page. She expected medical observations. Instead she found repeated notes describing symptoms that refused to match any known disease. The final entry stopped her completely. The king does not weaken because his body fails. Something unseen continues taking what should remain his. Claire slowly turned another page, only to discover it had been deliberately removed many years ago. Before she could continue searching, a gentle voice spoke behind her. Most people stop reading after that sentence. Claire turned to find an elderly woman carrying several carefully stacked books. Silver hair framed a kind face marked by decades of quiet wisdom. She introduced herself as Evelyn, the palace archivist responsible for preserving the oldest records of the kingdom. Claire smiled politely. Did you know the physician who wrote this believed His Majesty was never truly sick? Evelyn remained silent for a moment before answering. He believed many things others preferred to forget. Claire hesitated, then lowered her voice. Is it true? Evelyn carefully placed her books upon a nearby table. When I was younger, I watched 3 generations of royal physicians devote their lives to finding a cure. The finest healers crossed mountains and seas to stand where you are standing now. None failed because they lacked knowledge. Claire felt her heartbeat quicken. Then why did they fail? Evelyn's gentle eyes rested upon the ancient journal. Because they searched for an illness while ignoring a curse. The single word echoed through the silent library. Claire stared at her in disbelief. Evelyn slowly unlocked a narrow cabinet hidden behind one of the oldest shelves and removed an even older manuscript wrapped carefully in faded blue cloth. Delicate silver symbols decorated its cover beneath a title almost erased by time. Moon Bond Chronicles. Claire accepted it with trembling hands and opened the fragile pages. Ancient illustrations showed alpha rulers standing beside their queens beneath a radiant full moon surrounded by symbols identical to those carved throughout the oldest parts of the palace. Most of the text had faded beyond recognition, but one sentence remained perfectly clear. When darkness feeds upon the soul of the alpha, only truth freely chosen beneath the moon. Bond may reveal the hidden path. Claire looked up, her thoughts racing. Before she could ask another question, the distant sound of footsteps echoed beyond the library entrance. Evelyn gently closed the manuscript and returned it to Claire's hands. Do not let anyone know you have seen this, she whispered. There are people inside this palace who benefit from believing the king is simply dying, and they have spent years making certain no one asks what is truly stealing his life. Claire Bennet could not forget Evelyn's warning. For the next several days she carried the memory of the ancient manuscript with her like a quiet secret, revealing it to no one while carefully watching the life unfolding around her inside Ashford Palace. She expected to uncover hidden rituals or mysterious ceremonies, yet what she found instead was something far more ordinary. Adrian Ashford continued fulfilling every responsibility expected of a king despite the exhaustion that shadowed each passing evening. Every morning he attended meetings with advisors, listened patiently to farmers requesting assistance after the harsh winter, approved shipments of grain for distant villages, and personally reviewed reports from every province. He never complained, even when the effort left him visibly drained. Claire slowly began to understand why the palace servants respected him so deeply. They did not admire him because he was powerful. They admired him because he never stopped placing the kingdom before himself. One chilly morning, Claire wandered into the palace greenhouse, a peaceful sanctuary filled with herbs and flowering plants protected beneath tall glass ceilings. Warm sunlight filtered through the crystal panes while the scent of lavender, mint, and rosemary drifted gently through the air. The elderly gardener smiled warmly as Claire asked questions about the medicinal herbs growing there. She spent nearly an hour learning which leaves soothed fatigue, which flowers eased troubled sleep, and which roots had been brewed into comforting teas for generations. Before leaving, she gathered a small bundle of herbs with the gardener's permission and prepared a simple pot of fresh herbal tea herself. It was nothing extraordinary, only a humble recipe her mother had made during long winters back home. Carrying the steaming teapot carefully through the quiet corridors, Claire arrived outside Adrian's private study. She hesitated for a brief moment before gently knocking. "Come in," Adrian answered. The room was lined with towering bookshelves and covered with maps, financial reports, and neatly organized correspondence. Adrian stood beside the large window overlooking the snow-covered valley beyond the palace walls. He looked surprised to see her. Claire smiled softly and lifted the tray. "I thought you might enjoy a short break." Adrian glanced from the teapot to her face before quietly setting aside the papers in his hands. "No one has interrupted a council report with tea before." Claire gave a small laugh. "Perhaps they should have." For the first time since their marriage, Adrian smiled without restraint. It was a simple expression, brief but genuine, transforming the weariness that had long settled across his face. They sat together beside the fireplace while Claire poured 2 cups of fragrant herbal tea. Neither of them discussed curses, politics, or the future. Instead they spoke about childhood memories, favorite books, and the peaceful forests surrounding Claire's family home. Adrian admitted that he had not walked through the northern woods since becoming king. Claire promised that spring would eventually return to the mountains, no matter how long winter seemed to last. After a comfortable silence settled between them, she noticed a well-worn adventure novel resting upon a nearby table. "Have you finished this one?" she asked. Adrian shook his head. "Not yet." Claire picked it up and smiled. "Would you mind if I read a few pages aloud?" Adrian leaned back in his chair and quietly nodded. Her calm voice filled the study while the fire crackled softly nearby and snow drifted beyond the tall windows. For nearly half an hour Adrian listened without interrupting, his eyes gradually closing, not from weakness this time but from genuine peace. When Claire finally looked up from the final page she intended to read, she realized he had fallen asleep with the faintest smile still resting upon his face. She gently placed the book aside and quietly left the room without waking him. Outside the study, 2 palace servants exchanged astonished glances after noticing the king had slept peacefully for the first time in many months. Neither of them realized another pair of unseen eyes had witnessed the entire afternoon from the shadows at the far end of the corridor, quietly observing that the king's fading hope had begun returning one ordinary cup of tea at a time. The quiet rhythm that had slowly settled over Ashford Palace did not go unnoticed. Days turned into weeks, and Claire Bennet continued filling the empty spaces between Adrian Ashford's endless responsibilities with simple moments that asked for nothing in return. Some mornings they shared breakfast before the council meetings began. On other afternoons they walked through the palace gardens while the last traces of winter gradually surrendered to the first signs of spring. Claire never treated him as a man whose future had already been decided. She spoke about tomorrow as though it naturally belonged to both of them, and without realizing it, Adrian began doing the same. The change became impossible for the palace staff to ignore. The royal physicians quietly admitted that although they could not explain it, the king's strength had become more stable than it had been in years. He remained tired by evening, yet he no longer appeared defeated by every passing day. He attended longer council sessions, reviewed more petitions from neighboring villages, and even resumed walking through the northern gardens without asking for assistance. Claire noticed the difference every time he smiled a little more easily than the day before. One cool afternoon Adrian invited her to accompany him beyond the palace walls to a small hill overlooking the capital. It was the first time he had left the palace grounds for something other than official duties since their marriage. The road wound gently through evergreen trees until they reached an old stone overlook where the entire kingdom stretched across the valley below. Hundreds of rooftops reflected the warm afternoon sunlight while distant farms prepared for the coming planting season. Adrian rested both hands upon the weathered stone railing and remained silent for several moments. Finally he spoke. "When I first became king, I came here whenever I needed to remember who I served." Claire stood beside him, watching children play near the market square far below. "And when was the last time you visited?" Adrian smiled faintly. "Before I became too tired to climb the hill." Claire turned toward him with gentle concern. "Then I am glad you came back." Adrian looked across the valley, his expression thoughtful. "So am I." The peaceful moment lingered until distant church bells echoed across the countryside. Adrian quietly admitted something he had never spoken aloud to anyone. "For a long time I stopped making plans. Every season felt like it might be my last." Claire listened without interrupting. "Now I find myself wondering what the kingdom might look like next year." She smiled softly. "Hope has a way of returning when someone finally opens the window." Adrian laughed quietly, a genuine sound carried away by the spring breeze. Neither of them noticed a rider watching from the tree line far below before disappearing toward the capital. By evening, word of the king's unexpected outing had already reached the estate of Lord Victor Blackwood. The influential nobleman calmly listened as his messenger described everything he had witnessed. The king had walked farther than usual. He had laughed. He had looked healthier. Victor remained silent until the report ended. Then he slowly folded the parchment in his hands and stared into the fire burning inside his private study. "Hope," he murmured quietly, "is far more dangerous than illness." He reached into a locked drawer and removed an old silver medallion engraved with symbols almost identical to those Claire had seen inside the ancient manuscript. The metal felt strangely warm against his hand before its surface briefly darkened like a passing shadow. Victor's confident expression faded into careful calculation. Whatever had begun changing inside Ashford Palace threatened plans that had taken years to build. Across the kingdom, Claire spent the evening returning borrowed books to the Western Library, intending only to thank Evelyn once again for her guidance. Instead she found the elderly archivist waiting beside the hidden cabinet with unusual urgency written across her face. Without speaking, Evelyn placed another weathered manuscript into Claire's hands. This one carried a single title embossed in faded silver letters. "The Moon Bond Ritual." Claire's heartbeat quickened as she slowly opened the first page, unaware that the truth waiting inside would force both her and Adrian to make a choice neither of them had ever imagined. Claire carried the ancient manuscript back to her chambers with careful hands, waiting until the palace had fallen completely silent before opening its fragile pages. Moonlight spilled through the tall windows as she slowly read each faded line. Unlike the royal history stored throughout the palace, this record had been written by witnesses instead of rulers. It described a sacred bond created long before the kingdom itself existed, when the first Alpha King had vowed never to place power above compassion. The Moon Bond was never meant to strengthen a throne. It was meant to reveal the truth hidden within two hearts willing to choose one another freely. Claire turned another page and discovered the passage Evelyn had hoped she would find. "A curse could not survive where trust replaced fear, but neither love nor sacrifice could ever be demanded. Both had to be given without expectation." She closed the book for a long moment, realizing why no healer had succeeded. Everyone had searched for a magical cure while overlooking the one condition that could never be forced. The following morning Claire found Adrian already working inside the council chamber before sunrise. Maps covered the large table while advisors discussed trade routes and preparations for the spring harvest. Adrian looked tired, but the determination in his voice remained steady as he listened to every concern with patience. When the meeting finally ended, Claire waited until the last advisor had departed before quietly approaching him. "You have not rested," she said gently. Adrian smiled with familiar warmth. "There is always more work than daylight." Claire studied him for a moment before asking, "Have you ever wished you could stop carrying everything alone?" Adrian looked toward the palace windows overlooking the awakening city below. "Every king wishes that at least once." He paused before adding softly, "Very few believe they are allowed to." Claire stepped beside him. "Perhaps the strongest kings are the ones who finally let someone stand beside them." Adrian remained silent, yet something in his expression softened as though her words had reached a place no physician ever had. Later that afternoon they walked together through the royal gardens where early spring flowers had finally begun blooming beneath the warming sun. Children from nearby villages had been invited to visit the palace as part of the annual planting festival, and laughter filled pathways that had felt empty only weeks before. Claire watched Adrian kneel beside a little boy struggling to plant a young oak sapling. Rather than allowing the palace staff to help, Adrian patiently showed him how to press the soil gently around the roots before handing him the watering can. The child's proud smile lingered long after he ran back toward his family. Claire quietly observed the scene from several steps away. This was not the distant ruler described in court rumors. This was simply a good man who had forgotten that goodness deserved to be returned. As they continued walking, a gentle breeze carried hundreds of white flower petals across the garden. One drifted onto Claire's shoulder before Adrian instinctively reached over and brushed it away. Their hands touched only briefly, yet both paused at the same instant. A faint silver glow appeared beneath the wedding ring resting on Claire's finger before disappearing almost immediately. Adrian frowned in quiet surprise. Claire instinctively looked down at her own hand. Neither spoke, but both had seen it. Far above them, hidden behind the balcony of the western tower, Evelyn watched with quiet relief while whispering almost to herself, "The bond remembers." She turned just as hurried footsteps approached from behind. A young palace messenger bowed respectfully before delivering a sealed letter bearing the crest of Lord Victor Blackwood. Evelyn's peaceful expression slowly disappeared. She recognized the seal immediately. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, someone else had noticed the same silver light, and if Victor had begun moving sooner than expected, then the fragile hope growing between Claire and Adrian would soon face its greatest test yet. The silver light that had flickered beneath Claire Bennett's wedding ring refused to leave her thoughts. She mentioned nothing to Adrian, choosing instead to return quietly to the Western Library after sunset. Evelyn was already waiting beside the old wooden table, the sealed letter from Lord Victor Blackwood resting unopened beside several ancient records. The elderly archivist looked more concerned than Claire had ever seen her. Without speaking, she carefully unfolded another weathered map hidden beneath the manuscripts. It revealed the oldest foundations beneath Ashford Palace, far older than the kingdom itself. At its center stood a single location marked by a circle of silver symbols. Moon Sanctuary. Claire gently traced the faded drawing with her fingertips. "Is this where the bond was created?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "Every Alpha King has stood there. Most believed it was only tradition. Very few understood its purpose." Claire lowered her voice. "What happened when the ring glowed?" Evelyn smiled softly for the first time that evening. "The bond recognized what neither of you has spoken aloud." Claire felt warmth rise to her face. "Nothing has happened between us except kindness." Evelyn's gentle expression remained unchanged. "Sometimes kindness is where every lasting promise begins." Before Claire could ask another question, the palace bells echoed through the corridors, announcing an emergency meeting of the Royal Council. Evelyn quietly folded the map. "Go to him." I believe he will need you tonight. Inside the council chamber, tension replaced the peaceful atmosphere that had filled the palace during recent weeks. Advisors stood around the long table while messengers delivered reports from neighboring provinces. Lord Victor Blackwood had requested an immediate gathering of the High Council, claiming the kingdom required certainty about its future before summer arrived. Victor entered with perfect composure, offering Adrian a respectful bow before addressing the council. Your Majesty, the people remain loyal. However, rumors continue spreading throughout the kingdom. Merchants hesitate to invest. Noble families question the stability of the crown. They deserve reassurance. Adrian met his gaze calmly. And what reassurance would you suggest? Victor answered without hesitation. If your Majesty's condition continues declining, the council should begin preparing an orderly succession to protect the kingdom from uncertainty. The chamber fell completely silent. Claire watched Adrian carefully. Months earlier such words might have wounded him deeply. Instead he remained remarkably composed. You speak as though my future has already been decided. Victor lowered his head respectfully. I speak only from concern for the people. Adrian slowly rose from his chair. Though still not fully recovered, his posture carried quiet confidence that had been absent for years. Then allow me to ease everyone's concern. Every eye followed him as he walked steadily toward the tall windows overlooking the capital. This kingdom has endured storms, harsh winters, failed harvests, and generations of uncertainty because its people refuse to surrender hope before hope itself has vanished. He turned back toward the council. I asked them to do no less for their king. No one answered immediately. Even Victor remained silent, though disappointment briefly crossed his carefully controlled expression. The meeting ended without any decision regarding succession, but Claire noticed several council members exchanging thoughtful glances as Adrian left the chamber beside her. Outside, neither of them spoke while walking through the quiet corridor. Finally Adrian smiled faintly. I never expected defending my own future would feel so exhausting. Claire looked at him with steady warmth. Perhaps you are no longer defending it alone. Adrian stopped walking. Their eyes met beneath the soft candlelight, and once again the silver rings they both wore shimmered with the same quiet glow, lingering several seconds longer than before. Neither reached for the other. Neither needed to. The answer seemed to exist in the silence itself. Hidden behind an open doorway farther down the corridor, Victor watched the silver light disappear before slowly closing his hand around the ancient medallion concealed inside his coat. Its surface had turned almost completely dark. For the first time in many years, uncertainty reached even him, because the bond he believed had faded into legend was awakening once again, and if it reached its final promise before he completed his own plan, everything he had spent decades protecting would disappear with it. That evening the full moon rose above Ashford Palace with unusual brilliance, casting silver light across every rooftop, garden, and ancient stone pathway. Claire Bennet stood alone on the balcony outside her chambers, unable to ignore the feeling that something long forgotten was quietly calling her name. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Evelyn entered carrying the final manuscript wrapped in the same faded blue cloth as the others. She placed it carefully into Claire's hands before speaking with quiet certainty. There is no more time to wait. Claire opened the fragile pages and found a single passage marked by generations of careful hands. It described the final step of the moon bond. The sanctuary beneath the palace would awaken only when two hearts freely chose one another without fear, obligation, or sacrifice. No royal command could summon it. No ancient ritual alone could complete it. Only truth willingly spoken beneath the full moon could reveal whether the bond remained alive. Claire slowly lowered the manuscript. If this is true, why did no one ever tell Adrian? Evelyn sighed gently. Because too many people believed love could be arranged through duty. The bond has never obeyed duty. Claire closed the book and looked toward the moonlit gardens below. She already knew where she needed to go. Meanwhile Adrian remained inside his private study reviewing documents he could no longer concentrate on. His thoughts drifted repeatedly toward Claire, toward the unexpected peace she had brought into a palace that had forgotten how to hope. For months he had convinced himself that keeping emotional distance protected her from inevitable sorrow. Now he wondered whether that distance had only hidden the truth from himself. A quiet knock came at the door. Claire stepped inside. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence between them no longer felt uncertain. It felt familiar. Adrian set aside the papers and smiled softly. "I had a feeling you would come." Claire walked closer, her expression calm despite the emotions filling her heart. "There is something I need to ask you." Adrian nodded. "Anything?" Claire looked directly into his eyes. "When you married me, did you only see it as your final duty?" Adrian lowered his gaze for a brief moment before answering honestly. "At first, yes. I believed giving your family security was the only kindness I could still offer anyone." He slowly looked back at her. "But somewhere along the way, I stopped counting the days I had left and started looking forward to the moments we had not shared yet. That frightened me more than my illness ever did." Claire felt tears gathering, though her smile never disappeared. "Do you know when everything changed for me?" Adrian quietly shook his head. "The day you apologized for my future before ever asking anything for yourself. You treated me like a person before you ever treated me like a king." Adrian stepped closer, still leaving enough space for her to choose. "Claire, if I had met you before any of this, I believe I still would have walked toward you." Claire smiled through glistening eyes. "Then perhaps destiny simply took the longest road." Together they left the study and followed the hidden passage described in the ancient manuscripts. Deep beneath Ashford Palace, the moon sanctuary waited in complete silence. The circular chamber glowed beneath streams of silver moonlight pouring through an opening high above. Ancient symbols carved into the white stone floor slowly shimmered as they stepped into the center together. Claire reached for Adrian's hand. This time he did not hesitate. The moment their fingers intertwined, the silver rings upon their hands began shining brighter than ever before. Soft light spread across every ancient symbol surrounding them, filling the sanctuary with gentle radiance instead of overwhelming power. Adrian felt warmth moving through him unlike anything he had experienced in years. The crushing exhaustion that had followed him every day suddenly lifted, replaced by quiet strength that seemed to awaken from somewhere deep within his soul. Neither of them noticed the hidden doorway opening at the edge of the sanctuary until slow footsteps echoed across the stone floor. Lord Victor Blackwood emerged from the shadows, his darkened silver medallion resting in his hand as he stared at the awakened sanctuary with stunned disbelief. For the first time in decades, the secret he had devoted his life to controlling had slipped beyond his reach, and he realized that the greatest force in the kingdom had never been the ancient curse at all, but two ordinary hearts that had chosen one another freely when every reason existed to walk away. Lord Victor Blackwood stood motionless at the edge of the moon sanctuary, his confident expression replaced by quiet disbelief as the silver light continued flowing across the ancient symbols beneath Claire Bennet and Adrian Ashford. For decades he had believed the old legends had become nothing more than forgotten stories preserved inside dusty manuscripts. Now the sanctuary itself had answered with undeniable truth. The medallion resting in his hand slowly lost its dark color until the silver beneath finally reappeared, gleaming softly beneath the moonlight. Victor lowered it and released a long breath. So it was never the throne, he said almost to himself. It was always the choice. Adrian stepped forward, still holding Claire's hand. The heaviness that had followed every movement for years was gone. His posture stood naturally tall, his breathing calm and effortless. Yet the greatest change was not physical. The uncertainty that had quietly lived behind his eyes had disappeared, replaced by peaceful confidence. "You knew more than anyone else," Adrian said gently. "Why hide the truth?" Victor remained silent before finally answering. "Because I believed certainty protected the kingdom. I believed hope made people careless." When the curse first appeared generations ago, my family convinced itself that controlling the future was safer than trusting it. His voice carried no anger, only the weariness of someone who had spent too many years carrying the wrong responsibility. Claire looked around the sanctuary where every ancient symbol now glowed with warm silver light instead of cold mystery. The kingdom never needed fear to survive, she said quietly. It only needed people willing to choose one another. Victor slowly nodded. For the first time in many years, he bowed not only to his king, but also to the woman standing beside him. Then my task is finally finished. He carefully placed the restored medallion upon the center stone of the sanctuary before turning toward the passage leading back to the palace. No one stopped him. Some burdens could only be released, never taken away. As the first light of dawn appeared above the horizon, Adrian and Claire emerged from beneath the palace together. Palace servants gathering for the morning immediately noticed the difference. The king walked through the courtyard with steady confidence, greeting each familiar face with the warm smile many had not seen since the earliest years of his reign. Word spread through Ashford Palace before breakfast and reached the capital before noon. The king was no longer fading. Spring arrived fully across the kingdom during the weeks that followed. Farmers celebrated the strongest planting season in years. Trade routes reopened with renewed optimism. Children once again filled the palace gardens during community festivals, where Adrian and Claire welcomed every visitor without unnecessary ceremony or distance. The throne room, once overshadowed by uncertainty, became known instead for open doors and patient conversations. Adrian often sought Claire's thoughts before making important decisions, not because tradition required it, but because he trusted the wisdom she carried from an ordinary life that had never forgotten ordinary people. One peaceful afternoon they returned to the hill overlooking the capital where Adrian had once admitted he no longer dared imagine another year. The valley below shimmered beneath bright sunshine as church bells echoed gently across the countryside. Claire smiled as she watched families gathering in the marketplace. "Do you remember what you told me here?" she asked. Adrian nodded with quiet laughter. "I said I had stopped making plans." Claire intertwined her fingers with his. "And now?" Adrian looked toward the endless horizon before answering with complete certainty. "Now I think about every tomorrow." Claire rested her head lightly against his shoulder while a warm spring breeze carried the scent of blooming wildflowers across the hillside. Far below, the kingdom continued its ordinary life, unaware that its greatest victory had never been won through power, ancient magic, or royal authority. It had begun with a frightened young woman who chose kindness when duty asked for sacrifice, and with a weary king who learned that true strength was never measured by how long someone could carry every burden alone, but by the courage to trust another heart enough to share the journey. And whenever moonlight later touched the ancient sanctuary beneath Ashford Palace, the silver symbols quietly glowed once more, not as a warning of forgotten curses, but as a timeless reminder that love freely chosen would always remain the strongest promise any kingdom could ever protect.